I'm going to show you how to resize an image for inclusion on your website. So occasionally, and it probably depends on the camera that you're using, when you try to put an image on your Weebly website, you will get a message that pops up that says you need to resize the image. The image is, in fact, too large to go on the website. So Weebly has a limit of 10 megabytes per image. So anything that is over 10 megabytes won't go on. So for example, in this folder I've got here, I've just kept an image out, and you can see that this image, although it's quite basic, is actually over 10 meg. Now in this instance, what would happen is if we tried to upload it onto Weebly, it wouldn't work. Okay, so what we need to do therefore is resize it. Easiest way to resize it is to open it in Photoshop. So I can go to the image and I can go open with Photoshop. I could drag it to Photoshop, or I could open Photoshop and go via File, Open, and then direct to this image. I will do it this way. So we open it up and we can see that it was 11 point something meg. Okay, so here's the image. If I go to toolbar across the top and go to Image and Image Size. So when I click on image size, I get this box that pops up. Now what this box tells me is the physical dimensions of the image. So according to the camera that I've taken, if I was to print the image off to its maximum size, it would print off to 141 centimeters by 211 centimeters. That's 1.4 meters by 2.1 meters. So it's clearly a massive image. That's way too big to go on the internet, okay? We don't need something that big. When you see it on the internet, it's usually, probably 14 centimeters by 20 centimeters maximum. So there's two ways that we can resize the image. In terms of the file size, it all depends on how many pixels are in the image. So the more pixels there are, the greater the image size, which is why I was saying it may depend on the camera that you're using. So if you have a more expensive camera with a large sensor in it, it's going to take an image that's got naturally more megapixels, so therefore the file size is going to be bigger. So you can see here that we have a pixel count, which is 4,000 by 6,000 pixels, which basically comes out to nearly 69 million pixels in this image. For anybody that's not sure what a pixel is, so if we to zoom into this picture, so at some point we will see it starting to, this is when we call it pixelating. So each one of these squares is a pixel. You'll hear sometimes people refer to them as dots. And as we zoom out, you can see that they get smaller and they become less obvious. You can see that with this particular image, it's actually quite a good quality image. We can actually see the sort of details, the lines in the hand. Sometimes if an image becomes overly pixelated, so if we crop into an image too much, we start to lose some of the detail because the image starts to become grainy, so you can see up here. And when we talk about it being grainy, or sometimes you hear it being called noisy, that's effectively you are starting to see the individual pixels. Obviously, the more you zoom in, the more you see the individual pixels. What we want to try and do is resize the image in a way that doesn't reduce the number of pixels available on screen when we view it. Okay, so there's actually two ways that we can resize an image. So the first way, go back into image size, is I can change the physical dimensions. So I said before, we don't need an image that's 1.4 by 2.1 meters. So I might say, let's have this as, I don't know, 60 centimeters. Okay, so it's clearly a lot smaller than it was now. You can see that there's a link between these two, the width and the height, and that basically means if I change one, the other one will change accordingly, so that it reduces in size and still looks like the same image. If you ever go onto this and this has been clicked, so that link has been broken, if I change one of them, the other one doesn't change. So when I press OK, what we end up with is a distorted image. So you can see I've made it thinner, but it's still kept the same height, which is clearly not what we want. So always make sure that has the link on there. So let's say if I make this 60 centimeters by 90 centimeters. Press OK. It appears smaller on the screen, but that's really only because we've zoomed out. If you look carefully, you can still see that the same detail is there, and we can still start to zoom in and still contain the detail until we go too far. If I was to save this image now, though, having changed the dimensions of it, File, Save As, I'm going to give it a different name. So I'm not going to keep the original name. The reason I'm not keeping the original name is because if I do that, it will write over the original image. And actually, sometimes it's worth keeping the original image, because if you ever did want to print your image really, really large, you want that. You don't want the smaller image, because when you try and print it larger than the 60 by 90 we've just set it to, the image would start to pixelate. So you sometimes want to keep the original image. So if I call this Sophie's Pick 2 and press Save, press OK. Let me minimize this for a second. Let me go into that folder. So you can see here's the original image, which was 11.2 meg, and now by resizing it, it is now 2.7 meg. So it's what, nearly 5 times smaller than it was in terms of size, in terms of the weight of the image, the megabytes of the image. That would now go onto Weebly, no problem. Let me just close this one a second. Thank you. And let's open up the original one again, because I did say there are 2 ways that you can resize an image. So the second way you can resize an image is to change the number of pixels per inch. Okay, so this is, if you imagine taking a 1-inch section of the image and you count it in a straight line, in this instance it's saying there would be 72 pixels per inch. Now let's say, for argument's sake, I want to change that to 30 pixels per inch. I'm not changing the physical dimensions of it, I'm just changing the physical number of dots in the image. Press OK, press File, press Save As. Let's call this one number 3. Press Save, press OK. And this time, so the original was 11.2 and this one is now 2.6. Okay, so either option in theory is absolutely fine. However, there is a general rule of thumb that says an image should not be less than 72 pixels per inch. So in this instance, it leaves us no option. I can't reduce the resolution, so the only option I have is the first option I took, which is to change the physical dimensions of it. Again, this is probably dependent on the camera you've got. The more basic the camera, the less likely you are to have a high resolution. So some of you may find that your camera is naturally producing images at 72 pixels per inch, in which case you cannot reduce that resolution any further. If you've got a very high-end camera, you might find that it's producing 300 or 600 pixels per inch, which clearly gives you room to then reduce it further. Don't go straight down to 72, maybe reduce it by half, but in this instance we don't have that option. So in this instance I have to physically change the dimensions of it, and that would give me that image reduction there, and then my image would go onto Weebly, no problem. Thank you.